Good afternoon. This is Kevin Gibbons from Sophos, and we're kicking off the Synchronized Security series about InterceptX Advanced Protection. So our plan for today is to do a quick, brief overview of how InterceptX endpoint fits into the Sophos complete security, synchronized security story, specifically around the endpoint. So if you can see on my slide here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You'll see this logo on the screen all over our marketing, all over our branding, and it's a really well thought out and actually a very insightful way of describing how Sophos approaches synchronized security. All across this infinity symbol, you'll see the firewall, you'll see wireless, endpoint, web, the encryption, mobile. Over here is the endpoint. And to have a cohesive protection approach to your environment, to your assets, it's important to get all of those working together, or at least have a plan across all of those points. Sophos takes the approach of having as many of them work together, out of the same console, out of the same system, with the same threat protection, the same expertise behind it. Specifically around the endpoint, which is what we're going to cover today, the primary takeaways, the primary things I'm going to focus on over the next 15 minutes will be how Sophos is using artificial intelligence and deep learning combined with the established protection tools. In addition, we're also going to talk about the interface and how easy it is to manage that. Every vendor says they have an easy-to-use management interface, but after talking to well over hundreds of customers who are using other solutions, I can confidently say that ours is a cut above what you might see in the marketplace. And then part of the InterceptX solution also includes incident response tools. And I would describe them as intuitive, easy to use. You don't have to start digging in and creating filters and spend tons of time addressing threats that come up. Sophos InterceptX will tell you where the threat is, tell you what it did about it, and then tell you what you need to do about it. So those are the takeaways. I'll return to that in a few minutes. But with that, we're going to dive into Sophos Central, specifically around the endpoint. So let me move my PowerPoint off the screen. And this is Sophos Central. If you're new to Sophos Central, we've been using this interface for about 5 years. Our endpoint protection was due for a makeover at some point, and this was it. And this has been a very successful way of approaching it. And as many of the products as we can get under this interface, we're doing that. We're going to focus specifically today on the endpoint and the server protection. The high-level statement about servers is that all of the protection tools I'm going to outline in the next few minutes are available for server as well. So I won't be dialing that open, but just know that all the protection tools that I mentioned today are available for the server protection. So with that, let's talk about a quick overview of the threat protection. If you're familiar with Sophos, you might have known the product the product formerly known as SEC, Sophos Enterprise Console, which was a standby product for many years. We had a lot of success with that, but that was the one that needed a makeover. The first thing we did, which was a big improvement on SEC, was giving administrators the ability to assign policies to specific users or specific endpoints. Historically, we could only assign a policy to an endpoint. Give us your list of endpoints, we'll assign a policy to an endpoint, which is great until you've got an endpoint that has a kiosk or is a shared asset. You might need policies that follow specific users around to different endpoints, or if you're having 3 different users logging into the same endpoint that have different security needs, that's an important piece to have. If we go into the policies, the first thing I want folks to see is the list of policies that are available. And going back decades to the early days of the Enterprise Console, we were locking out devices, locking out applications, inspecting traffic for some lightweight DLP, which is included in all of our licenses for the endpoint protection, and we're allowing administrators to implement some controls around users' web surfing habits. These are all intended to reduce the attack surface, meaning reducing the opportunities for bad actors to gain entry. If you want an example of how a device was used, go watch the documentary about Stuxnet and somebody leaving thumb drives in a parking lot. Application control, same thing. If you want an easy way to gain entry is to be using old versions of old browsers, or give users the ability to install their previous versions of their old applications that have known vulnerabilities. The more you lock down those kinds of things, the safer you and your organization will be. But the real cornerstone, the real reason folks are going to talk to Sophos is about the endpoint protection, and specifically the one term at the top of everybody's mind is ransomware. A close second would probably be data security and data exfiltration. So we're going to step through the threat protection policy. In my initial slide, my only slide for that matter, in my initial slide, I said we're combining artificial intelligence with established protection tools. And what that really means, if you're reading the lines, is signature-based protection and reputation-based protection. That was something that Sophos did back in the days of Sophos Enterprise Console. And it did the job for a very long time, and our competitors in that space did well as well. I tip my hat that there were several companies that helped raise the game across our industry, but that didn't last. The bad actors found ways to bypass those protection mechanisms, and as an industry, we needed to respond and keep pace and find other ways to anticipate the new threats. And that's what we're going to spell out here. The first thing, and I like to step through this threat protection policy by picturing the life cycle of a threat. So if you're familiar with the MITRE attack chain or the Lockheed Martin kill chain, the first thing the bad actors need to do is gain entry. And the Sophos just released its threat report. I believe one of our competitors also did one the same week. The vast majority of threats and attacks and incidents begin with the downloading of a file or a malicious file being introduced into the environment. So the most common method of entry, spear phishing attacks and drive-by downloads or watering hole attacks. In Sophos' case, if you've got InterceptX Advanced running, Sophos is going to recognize a weaponized browser session, a fileless attack, where the browsers are being redirected out to wherever out in the other side of the world where the threats are coming from that particular day. And there's no file, there's no download to even happen. That's going to come later. If we can block that method of entry here, we're going to do that by inspecting the JavaScript, inspecting the redirects, the zero frames. If there's a file being emailed into your users that's got scripts embedded in it, the user will not see that file. If it's got, we'll inspect the contents. If it's a legit script, we'll allow that script. But by and large, if it's a heavily embedded script, that's a pretty clear indicator that this is a weaponized file. Moving along the life cycle of that threat is where signature scanning comes into play. And that's a good thing. That's another layer of protection. If you're shopping around the industry, artificial intelligence and deep learning and machine learning are hot topics. There are some vendors that say they have it, and their science and their learning model and their data sets are not awesome. It doesn't take long to dig into how they're doing artificial intelligence to find that. Our artificial intelligence started as a DARPA project in the Cyber Genome Project. What this software does is when it sees a new file, it breaks down the fundamental attributes and components. Does it have this memory addressing? Does it have this capability built in? Was it coded with this compiler? Did it use these libraries and these certificates and this much white space? And there's thousands of elements that it will look at in a new file. And it has already learned from Sophos' decades of experience where we took that software, pointed it on our terabytes and petabytes of samples and said, go learn, that's what malware is, go figure it out. Now when it sees a new file, it's going to look at those same attributes and say, we've seen that same attribute in 90 million malware samples and 1 million good files. So we can pretty well reasonably conclude in our decision matrix that it's malicious. If you're shopping around, the keywords are What was the data set? Where did the software learn from? Where was it created? One other thing I want to cover in our last couple minutes is the Threat Analysis Center. This is where I was referring to the incident response tools. There are lots of incident response tools where you're going to get data. You're going to get all sorts of data. The real question is, what do you need that data for? And if you're looking at security, if you're dealing with cybersecurity, you need that data, you need that analysis to know where the threat came from, where it moved to, what it did. Just getting an alert that some host has a problem is not adequate. In this case, in this incident, we're highlighting the host name, where it came from, what happened, and the end result, and we're laying it out in this easy-to-use interface. We're calling out the root cause, what caught Sophos' attention, what files talk to what other files, launching which processes, and it's tracking what registry access. So with InterceptX, these are tools that are essential to your incident response. In a later session, we'll really deep dive on EDR. EDR builds on top of this model and on top of this tool, and the way I like to describe it is incident response on steroids, where you can really dive into exactly what happened. We don't just want to know what the process was, we want to know who touched that process, where it came from, what other processes the networks are talking to, what other networks the processes are talking to, and on and on and on. But that's just a little teaser about the EDR session coming up in a couple weeks. So that's the threat cases. Let's get back to the central dashboard one more time. And the last thing that I wanted to call out is, as I said at the top of the conversation, this is a very streamlined interface. You can see going down the left-hand side, numerous products that we're putting out here. In just about everything that I did in this short session, it took me 2 to 3 clicks to get where I needed to go. With some of the other interfaces you'll see in the marketplace, it's click after click after click after click. And it's not intuitive. The policies are not well laid out, and the help is not awesome. So I hope you'll agree that this is a pretty straightforward tool. It's quick to get it up and running, quick to have a clear picture on what you're doing. And if you need to use this for your day-to-day, it's quick to get the data you need in order to effectively respond to threats and provide a proactive approach to your cybersecurity needs. So we're coming up on 2:15. This was just meant to be a quick intro overview of what our endpoint protection is. I know there are other sessions that cover other avenues of what Sophos protects and where we play. Do come back for the EDR session in a couple weeks. I'd love to really spell out. It's actually a very hot topic for us internally. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for coming. Look forward to talking with you again in the future. Thank you very much.